How's it going? This is Keanu Yamamoto with the Coaches Podcast, in here with Coach Michael Seemann, head women's volleyball coach for Portland State. Coach, thanks for jumping on. Please tell us about your family, journey, background, all that good stuff.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey, that's for sure. Grew up in Wisconsin, was the youngest of 4 kids, played multiple sports growing up in high school. Volleyball wasn't necessarily, it certainly wasn't an organized sport in Grafton where I was. There were some teams down south in Milwaukee, but ended up playing a lot of co-ed leagues, which is a very common thing out in the, we'll call it dirt in Wisconsin, not necessarily sand all the time. But that's where we kind of got our start. And then a group of us, in my class, we played quite a bit and actually were able to build a sand court, which was really awesome. So we were able to play a lot of ball and absolutely fell in love with the game. Ended up going to Wisconsin-Madison Technical College and played on the men's team there. We played the Wisconsin circuit. So all of the D3 Wisconsin schools, and ended up transferring to Wisconsin-Eau Claire, who I thought was at the best time, probably the strongest program in the state at that time. Jumped on that team, played there, had an awesome time playing with those guys. And then from there, spent some time traveling around the country a little bit, doing other things, spent a season in Vail, other activities that are unrelated to volleyball or school. But then actually kind of found that I was, missing some things in my life in terms of like having certain meaning and wanting to kind of get back in the sport. So I actually checked back in with Lisa Irby at the time, who was the head women's coach for Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and noticed that a small school up in northern Wisconsin named Northland College, which no longer exists, and shut down, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago, was looking for a head coach. And it's an NAIA school. It was environmental arts. I have almost zero coaching experience, no college coaching experience. And they hired me. So I was thankful for that opportunity. And in 4 years, ended up turning that program into a positive direction, had a blast. Perfect place to kind of, try things, fall on my face, all the things that happen when you start and when you continue to coach. Realized I wanted a bigger market for volleyball, ended up moving west and actually came to Portland. And through the connections I had made at Northland College and my opponents, I was able to get a hold of Terry Newberger, who was the head coach at Mountain Hood Community College. And so I was able to get involved with that program and became the head coach. I was there for 4 years. And along with that, I was able to help run a club called Nike Northwest Juniors, in which I was coaching for. And that's actually one of the biggest clubs in the state of Oregon at that time, as far as like exposure. Yeah. And so I actually got to work with some really good talent, which then attracted a lot of Division I connections. So as I was coaching club, for example, Oregon State, Nancy Samara at the time, watched our team, wanted some of the kids that I was coaching, but then also noticed me as a coach and gave me the opportunity to coach there. So I went from 4 years at Mount Hood Community College, ended up at Oregon State, coached there for 4 years. And then eventually Nancy Samara left that program. And it was an opportunity for me to get back into Portland. At the time, Jeff Mazzocchi was the head coach here, and he had kind of announced his retirement and wanting to spend more time with his son, who was a quarterback, going to be going to Western Oregon. And so we kind of made that pact of I'd be associate head for the first year, and then we would flip the next year, and then he would just leave. And so that's what happened, and that was 22 years ago. And so here I am. Yeah.
That's awesome. I forgot to ask you before we got on Wisconsin. Are you a Packers guy? Is that your team growing up?
Yeah, you have to be. I mean, if you're not, you're no longer welcome back in Wisconsin.
I'm a Vikings fan, so I don't know why. I grew up, loved Randy Moss, loved Chris Carter. Then Adrian Peterson came along, so I've just kind of stuck with them. But I got no bad blood against the Packers because I was a quarterback in high school and I loved Aaron Rodgers. So like once the Vikings were eliminated, like I loved to watch him play.
Yeah.
Speaking about volleyball in Wisconsin, I just found this out, I don't know, a week or two ago, but I don't know I'm going to butcher the name, but one of the biggest grass tournaments in the country. Is it Wapaka or something?
Oh,
that's
yeah,
out
Wapaka.
in Wisconsin. Yeah.
Have
you played in that? Is that a fun tourney?
It's huge. And oddly enough, I've never played in that, but yeah,
really?
It's incredible. Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Funny. Well, tell us just a little bit about the why behind getting into coaching, and then obviously coaching, like you said, for 22 years at Portland State.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I found to be, I guess, in the beginning, the why in the beginning was I knew I wanted to be in the field of teaching. I really enjoyed learning, and I also enjoyed teaching. And I really liked the relationships that were able to kind of forge throughout that process. And yet, it wasn't like a static classroom. It was, it was physical. It combined for me the creative part of, discovering how to get something out of somebody or how to approach a skill. And along with that, have relationships and develop those relationships and be able to, kind of see growth within that. As I get farther along and I don't think those, the satisfaction of doing that has changed much, but I certainly think now more so, just trying to be innovative and trying to be creative in my coaching as I move forward, and also valuing even more those bonds that I've made and watching the players not only, grow within the program, graduate, but also to kind of follow what they're doing in their lives beyond this, which is, I think, a really a hidden benefit, not hidden, but it's a benefit you don't think of, initially when you talk about coaching.
Yeah. That first head coaching job at Northland College, what was something that really took you by surprise as far as being a collegiate coach and being a collegiate head coach?
Well, I think, that's a program where I was everything. So I was the head coach, I was the assistant coach, I was the equipment manager, I was, I was the trainer, I was the strength trainer, I was all the things, which is probably pretty common most JC and NAIA levels, probably not today as much, but I think that was probably the biggest thing is what goes the amount of energy and the amount of things that go into a season, into building a team, into scheduling, into transportation, all those things. You don't see those things when you think about a coaching job or even watch another team, obviously. So I think all of those logistics and the things that accompany that were not overwhelming, but it was a lot. And I think that it was one of the reasons why I was also interested in moving forward and moving up and seeing how, with more resources, what that looks like and how that operates. But yeah, I can't say, I think that's the beauty of starting at a school like Northland College, which was NAI. Expectations were low, I'll tell you that. But so, like I said, you could learn as you go and not necessarily have huge consequences. Say, if this was your first job at a Division I, then those mistakes are much more pronounced.
You said 22 seasons total at Portland State?
Yeah, I'm going on. This is as a head coach, I'm going on year 20 or 21, I think, somewhere in there. Yeah,
that's a long time, Coach, and I'm sure
Yes.
you've had opportunities to move up. Especially in those early years when you guys are wildly successful and you got two Big Sky Coach of the Years. Can you just kind of talk about, just the commitment to want to stay at one place and, why that's important to you?
After some of those years, there was opportunities. I even, I took some interviews. I, evaluated whether a move would be right at that time. And at the time, it didn't seem right. I always felt like I was continuing to want to build on momentum that I had the year before. I also, I'm a big believer in kind of having the your whole life be balanced to some degree. And while I think that, I could have made the jump to maybe a bigger program, it was potentially in an area that I wasn't crazy about living. And I just really, really valued my lifestyle outside of coaching, my ability to, walk to work in an hour, bike to work in 15, 20 minutes, take the train to work if I want to. I love the seasons in Portland. And, Portland State has been good to me. They have supported what we do here. And they want to see this, continue to see this program have success. And so that's also really important. Now, it's not without its challenges, but I also think that pretty much wherever you go, there's going to be challenges, but they're just going to be different. And I think these were some of the battles that I was willing to continue to fight. And like I said, overall, this is a place that makes me happy. And so I think I'm not going to ignore that. I also, often thought about in my mind, what was the clearest path to an NCAA invite. And I really feel like winning the Big Sky Conference is still very doable from our program standpoint. It is an expectation every year, and I hope to be there. But obviously that's not all of it. So
yeah, if I were to ask you about your coaching philosophy, what's important to Coach Michael Seemann, what's important to Portland State volleyball, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing is that we're helping whole people grow, and part of that we're doing it within the context of sport, right? Within the context of volleyball, which to me is such an incredible sport. It defines a team sport. Almost in any other sport you can name, football, basketball, you can grab the rebound on one end, you can run down the other side and throw it down, and you didn't need one single other person, In theory, a quarterback can take the snap and run. And I'm saying now, obviously there's multiple components to all that stuff. It's an oversimplified example, but I love that in volleyball, you really, really need the people around you, and it needs to be done well. And as a result of that, I think some of the bonds that you create within the game are really special and they last a long time. And, there's just like a lot of sports too, there's lifelong friends that you're building in there as well. But I also think if it comes down to kind of more of like the actual coaching part of this program, I really like to stress that our lessons are learned in the gym, because I think we spend a lot of time in meetings and talking and one-on-one and all that stuff. And I think the lessons that we learn in the gym are things that can be defended every single day, that can be reminded every single day. And those are some lessons that are going to stick, I think, and hopefully help the people within the program grow up and become, productive people and happy people as they move on.
Yeah. Greatest moment or moments so far in coaching?
I mean, winning it, going to NCAAs, it's hard to beat that. All the hype around it. It's both years we went up to University of Washington and all the stuff that kind of goes with that is I think so exciting. I'd have to specify that I think the greatest one out of both of those opportunities was when we played Hawaii at a neutral site at University of Washington for the first round. And that was just, it was unbelievable. It was a blast. And I think just that to me is like, I kind of equated to that one golf shot where you take a golf swing, you're like, okay, I'm hooked, even though the other 10 swings are terrible. You're just hooked. You want that again.
Yeah.
You get hungry for that again. And I think that's got to be one of the highest moments. I would say more on a general scale, when I hear somebody, for example, like Garen Schlatter, she was one of our setters for 4 years, tremendous player. She's on and moved to California, but she's coaching club and I see her every time we go recruiting and she continues to coach club and loves it. Like to me, that hits really hard that our kids are graduating and that they're essentially that their love for the game isn't gone or they're not burnt out, and that they're sharing and kind of helping grow the game from their point as a coach as well. And that is, one of those things that it's a different kind of high compared to going to NCAAs, but it certainly is, it's a great feeling to know that those players are continuing to grow the game and that they still have a passion for the game.
What was her name?
Garen Schlatter.
Is she from Canby by any chance?
Yes. Yep.
And
her mom.
Was she related to was
Correct.
that her brother that ended up passing away?
Yes.
Damn.
Yep.
Talk about dealing with adversity and then, coming out on the other end.
Yeah. That family will never be the same. Like, it's terrible tragedy. It was terrible.
Yeah. One of my college roommates and best friends now, he's from Canby. So I kind of knew about all that when it happened.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll get back on track here. We'll change the tune a little bit.
All right.
So we cross paths playing beach. So kind of talk to me a little bit about the dynamics. Like if you're out there recruiting, right? Do you like kids that play beach volleyball? Do you think the skill of beach volleyball translates to indoor? Can you kind of talk about just the dynamics of indoor versus beach and how you see it as an indoor coach? Because I know you're a good beach player and I know you got love for beach ball too.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's translation. I certainly think that there's the skill component of it, the reading component of it. I certainly think with indoor and there being, 6 players on the court, you never want this in your team, but it's easy to hide, or there's your number 6 or number 5 on the floor could be paying attention to something else or not paying attention at all, and you can still get away with winning the point. Whereas in beach, obviously it's much more refined to just the two of you. So I really like that component of it. I think also mentally, there's no breaks in beach. So I think that there's, if people are playing to win and they take it serious and they're playing ball with their partner and trying to win, you got to lock in. I think you can't take points off. And again, in sixes, it's possible that you can take points off and it doesn't necessarily always affect your team, if that makes sense. So I think that's from the mental standpoint. And from your investment standpoint, as you're playing, beach asks a lot more from you. Now, we want all 6 players indoor with that same level of focus. But again, I think just by nature of the game, you can get away with it a little bit. I think skill-wise, there's some definitely crossover things. I think the ball handling component, the eye work. I think in beach, the game does move a little slower. So you do, especially someone who's learning what to look at and when, that is an easier game to teach. Like getting your eyes off the set sooner, getting it on the attacker sooner, looking at the information that tells you what to do next. We emphasize that a lot in indoor, but the speed of the game is much faster. So those sequences are happening much faster. And, for some positions like a middle blocker, it's not as clear. It's not just go front the attacker, or whether you're staying up or dropping off the net. It's like you got to work you have 3 different directions to think about to some degree. So there's the speed of the game and the decision making is much more complex at the indoor level. But from a skill development standpoint, I also love the serving experimentation and outdoor. You get a lot more opportunities to do different things, spinners, left, right, hybrids, jump floats, all those things. sky balls, putting into the wind. I love that there's factors like that you don't have in indoor. And I do think some of that stuff can come back into indoor, and you can apply that, a lot of that. But yeah, overall, and I think a lot of people argue, jumping here and there. I think, if you spent the whole time training in the sand, you're not getting that really strong push off. So there is a detriment to the jump factor, even though you do, you feel like you fly when you're in indoor. But
yeah,
I've
never thought about it like that, because I've always thought about it like it being beneficial. But I mean, you are learning a whole nother jump as opposed to standing a little bit more vertical jump, and then compared to
the runway.
The runway. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even like I don't know the science. I mean, it's possible, but I would imagine a lot of outdoor players who are just outdoor exclusively need plyometric training from a surface that you can push off of, because that's the whole idea, is having the ability to put force on an object that is not moving underneath you.
Yeah,
so it's like that's where the sand difference is.
That's a good point. I liked what you said about just the component of it's just two players out in the sand, and that, sometimes in the indoor you can hide that player. I was talking with another coach about 1 or 2 episodes back, and we're talking about, just the value of multi-sport athletes in the recruiting process. And I'm not sure if that's something that's, prevalent for you guys, but this is a football coach, and he's talking about, is he a multi-positional player? Because you can see the game from the other side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Is he a multi-sport athlete? Because he felt like with multi-sport athletes, they could make adjustments a little quicker because they've just been used to it in so many different realms. And one of the things that came up, and I think is very prevalent in beach, is like when you do multi-sports and when you're playing beach, you can get in a rut. So you have opportunities to fail more. And I think you have opportunities to be in adverse situations more, because let's say we're playing in a tournament and you might be the weaker attacker. Like, they're going to serve you, whatever, 20 points. And so like, how do you work through that? I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah.
but I guess from a question is like, is someone who plays beach, is it a bonus for you guys in the recruiting process, or is it something that you're kind of seeking out, or what does that look like?
No, I would never say we're seeking that out. I think that, from purely from a recruiting standpoint, it's probably not a bonus if they really want to play both sports, which is becoming more and more rare, right? It's been around long enough now where you have enough programs that are specialized, and that's the way it should be. But for us, it doesn't weigh a huge factor. Matter of fact, I think if I had to say the perfect candidate of someone who has both is they're really passionate and they want to play indoor, but they also play beach. I think it as crazy as it may sound, it is a great off-season activity for them. It's not, the wear and tear of being indoor, the same reason why we talk about the force off the ground, that same ground is there when you land as well. So I do think that it's easier on the body. So I like that. I like to recruit players who do both, but I think that primarily, it's an indoor, the indoor has got to be number one.
Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't scratch anybody off the list if they didn't play sand.
If there was, some advice that you would go back and give your younger self, or go back and give, aspiring coaches who want to get within the college game, what would that advice be?
I mean, I think like, actually that's one of the questions that I read off that sheet that you said, might be asking. And I took some time with it, because I think I was taking the question more so, what would I want my younger self to do a better job of, or to do differently? And I would say the biggest thing for me is I was unbelievably passionate about coaching. And so I would just seek knowledge. I would go to the Final Four. I'd go to all the sessions. I would, do all the things and educate myself. And I did that consecutively for a decade, and just kept, just absorbing and tweaking and continuing to kind of develop what I thought was best for me as far as utilization of all that information. I think what I didn't do a really good job of was, a lot of connections, a lot of relationships among other coaches, my colleagues at any level. I was more of like, I'm going to this session and then I'm going to the next session. And, not that I didn't do a lot of the social stuff outside of that, but it's like, I didn't create a lot of relationships, I think. And I think that's what I think, like most industry, like most professions, it's important to develop those relationships, not only for, just pure learning, just like me learning from you and talking about the game, but also I think just in terms of, future tense of this person may be a head coach someday, and this person may be an AD someday. And that network, especially when I first started coaching, volleyball network was extremely small. It still is small, but obviously it's this whole sport has blown up in the last 10 years. And so that's what I would say. I'd say to anybody who is young, to obviously seek all the knowledge you can, be the best coach you can, but also to develop those relationships and then cultivate them, and use them as you move forward. Because I've got colleagues who coach. I've got it's probably closest to the ones that are in my conference. But you're not calling up Sac State and being like, hey, what do you think about what I'm saying, like, especially when it's something like a question where I don't know. And it's not that we have that many questions, but I think that's to me, the relationships I do have are great. And so I kind of just wish there was more of them, I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's the one thing I love about, just coaching in general. And I had the opportunity, I guess, be at Boise State for 2 years, Oregon State for 2 years, at least in the college game, and then Oregon just in the recruiting department, just all the coaches you cross paths with. But just as my time as a graduate assistant at Boise State, the guys that I GA'd with, one's the offensive line coach at Louisiana Tech, one's the receiver coach at Nevada, one's the quarterback coach for Seattle Seahawks.
That's awesome.
One's the edge coach for Boise State. So, I mean, it's cool to see the guys that I work with and, see where they're at now. And, just like you said, with the relationships now, just like, I just had the O-line coach on just this last week.
Oh, sweet.
But I'm going to have to wait another couple years, and probably one of those guys are going to be a head coach somewhere, or the guy who's with the Seahawks that's working with Sam Darnold might be a freaking OC or in the next 2 years. So that, I mean, to your point, I think relationships are a big deal. And, I've been very fortunate enough to not necessarily be around a lot of staffs, but within, I guess, that lower support level of those staffs, there was a lot of people that were coming in and out of those doors that was really great, for me to be exposed to.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you just said, is like really take time to marinate just those relationships as much as possible. All the externals kind of removed, the transfer portal, the NIL removed. What would you say is the greatest challenge within coaching?
I think what I've been kind of trying to not wrestle with, but what I'm really trying to continue to, like, my biggest emphasis of evolving and trying to be the most effective coach I can is how to deliver feedback, and maybe even, like, I don't want to say bad news, but how do you effectively, deliver behavioral change or something you want to see different from a player, and say it in a kind way, and deliver that in a kind way that is receivable by them. I don't think that's necessarily a symptom of today's youth, which I think is used too often, as far as, like, what's it like to coach today than it was 10 years ago as far as the athlete. I'm not a big fan of suggesting that the athlete has changed that much, because of, now you can throw all the noise away, like the social media, like you said, and NIL and all that stuff. And I call that noise because it is there, but I think what you're talking about is the relationship between a coach and a player, and them being able to learn. And I think the greatest challenge right now is to be able to continue to deliver news that isn't always going to want to be heard to a player, and deliver it in a kind way that they can receive it and make that change. And we are, by all means, are not, we're not a tough staff. We're not yellers. We're not all that stuff. But it doesn't matter. I'm finding this balance between keeping a player confident and yet asking more from them, and breaking down certain areas of the game for them. And it's a tricky thing. It's a balance. And I'd say, like, even in my early years of coaching, I was not oblivious to that, but I just was like, I see a problem, I'm going to tell you what it is. And then we're all wondering why, that player isn't as confident as they were when they came in. You know what I'm saying? It's an art. It's an art of coaching to be able to deliver those messages, to be able to ask for feedback, or to be able to ask for change, to really develop and strengthen that feedback loop, and yet keep that person confident. And I'm finding that to be, that is a really, really fine balance, and I think a difficult thing to do. And as you know, it's not the same for this person as it is for this person.
No doubt. Yeah. Can you kind of talk about just the evolution of, Coach Seemann at Northland, Coach Seemann at Mount Hood, Coach first, head coaching job at Portland State to now, just as far as just that dynamic and that communication style, and kind of how that's ebbed and flowed throughout those years?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, certainly in the early years, I didn't know as much about anything. So it was just more of like, we are discovering this as a group. I'm part of this learning, overall, I'm part of this whole learning process. I still had ideas and put lineups and all that stuff. But I think certainly as I became more knowledgeable and more confident in my own coaching, it evolved. Very different from when I was at Oregon State as an assistant. I felt like I was almost better at doing what I said, about that than I went as a head coach my first years at Portland State. There's that certain level of, like, maybe it's ego, maybe whatever it is, but those first years at Portland State, like I said, I found myself, being like, well, I think I'm really good at identifying, what needs fixing, blah, 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 and then being able to address that, but kind of ignoring the mentality of that athlete, right? And what you're doing to them. Now, there's some athletes who are going to take that and they could gobble it up and they're like, I got this. But most athletes, to some degree, they're coming in confident. You recruited them. They're coming from a club team where they were the best player, best high school player. They're confident, like, and you don't want that to go away, and then there's other coaching philosophies that say, hey, ground them out, get them to zero, and build them back up. I'm not a believer of that. I think that is so imperative that you run that balance of keeping that athlete confident, but then again, identifying and trying to address the change that needs to happen for them to become better.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. And I think that is the challenge. That's the art of coaching.
No, that's good stuff, Coach. And just to go back to your Oregon State, as an assistant, and I do think the title and the weight of the title plays into that too, because just being a graduate assistant within the defensive line room, I was a freaking DB. I don't know anything about fucking D-line play, and it's that interior front. But what I can be a good sounding board for those guys, and I can be, for lack of a better term, like just a little bigger brother role within that room. So I think exactly what you're talking about. I do think the dynamics of the position of the coach, whether it's the feedbacks from the head coach, the assistant coach, like I think from the assistant coach's role is like, this guy has, my best interest in me. Don't take this the wrong way, but he is not the ultimate decision maker as far as whether I play or don't play. And so I just think the weight, they can hear the message as opposed to hear the tone. And I think with, being from a head coach's perspective, like they might be getting too caught up in, gosh, this guy controls whether or not I play or not.
Absolutely.
Like, this is how I feel, like you're saying, now they become a shell of themselves or hurt their confidence.
Yeah, it's funny because I had even just a tiny little bit of just a tiny little taste of it, just because we have camps leading up to, we're running camps, right? And so, I've got the freshmen there who are, their first year here. We haven't started yet, but they're here coaching with camp. So they're hearing us talk about the things we use, the language we use, all that stuff, the drills, and even, obviously they're camp coaches when we haven't started season yet. But even, they're getting in some of these drills, and I'm noticing this freshman is just like one thing that just, I wanted to tackle it now. I wanted her to start thinking about these things now, even though we're not even in season yet, and possibly illegal to even give her that feedback. But she's like, okay, and the next day, and then, she was in a drill the next day, and I kind of walked past her, and I was just like, and I try to give my feedback like pretty simple, one or two words, 3 words, and then I said it again, and I kind of was like, I could almost see her demeanor start to just kind of like go from really, really positive and excited to just one level. It's not like she started pouting or anything like that. She didn't. And she's a great kid and she's going to be awesome. But that's why it was kind of sitting on fresh in my brain, is I'm like, I'm really interested in figuring out, and for each individual, how to get the message across without kind of picking away at their confidence.
Yeah.
No, I know confidence is, it should be more resilient in that. We should be more resilient in that. But I think, like you said, it's coming from the head coach, and from until I get to know these athletes well, for all we know, she could be saying, "Oh, I thought I was maybe a starter, but no way now. Like he hates me, or why did he recruit me if these are the things that that we're tackling? If this is like, man, I thought you thought I was good. You know what I'm saying? Like you've got all that.
Yeah,
it's insane.
That's good stuff, Coach. And I'm thinking like, just your approach with Portland State Volleyball. And I'm thinking that, some of the coaches I've been around with the football realm, and it's a lot more straight to the point, and it's coming out a little harsher. Yeah. But I think the coaches that I've been around, they do a really good job of prefacing, like, especially in the recruiting process too. And, early on in the meeting rooms for those upcoming guys, like, hey, this is what it is. This is what it's going to be like. And they do a good job of laying out just the standards and expectations. So they can kind of get away a little bit with, barking at a kid a little bit more. But yeah, I think what you just addressed, I think that's big time. And I think that's across all sports, man.
Absolutely.
That was a really good point right there. Can you kind of just lay out in season, just practice structure, what that looks like? Just kind of a brief overview of what that looks like for you guys. Game week.
In season game week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Generally speaking, like Mondays and Tuesdays are going to be your lift days. It's kind of the more kind of evaluative areas on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I say that in the realm of both, watching film, picking out some, really important clips for both the team for positional work. We will have our positional meetings in those 2 days. We will have team film sessions. Like these are the systems things that we need to go over. Mondays and Tuesdays for us are more about what we need to get better at. So coming off of the weekend, hey, we definitely need to get better at, whatever, fill in the blank, serve receive. We've got to get better at this. And so Monday and Tuesday, we'll be addressing that. And I'd say even, Wednesday, generally speaking, some Tuesdays, depending on where we're at and how good or bad the weekend was, it's more about what we're good at. And I think that's really important. I want Wednesday's practice to be like, this is what we do well. This is what we're doing. And let's make sure we continue to do this well. And then that brings us into that first game on Thursday. And Friday typically is more of a touch up. But again, Friday is going to be that same theme of we do this well. And there's not enough time to do anything else. You can play your worst match on Thursday. You can write down what you need to do, but you cannot go into Friday being like, we're going to work on this. That's why I like to front load the week with like, these are the things we got to get better at. And as the week progresses, it's this is what we do well, and we got to do this well. And so again, feeding into more of the team's confidence going into those matches instead of feeling like we have deficits everywhere.
Yeah. How do you go about, like, what does the development look like, throughout the season? I think with football, it's a little different because they do a really good job. You only got 12 games, right? And you're prepping for those 12 games, and you have a week to prep for those 12 games, and you know exactly what that's going to look like. And the schedule, the turnover, unless it's like an early Friday game or a weird Thursday game, like everything's going to stay consistent. And then you're going to have your JV guys, for lack of a better term, or your scout guys. They're going to do a scrimmage on Sunday or Friday or whatever it is for that particular program, because there's a development for, some of those younger players throughout the year. Mm-hmm. What does that look like for volleyball, because you guys have so many games throughout the season?
Yeah, I think that, the first thing I would say is you've got a lot of kind of going back to like the beginning of the week and just addressing that component of identifying what you need to get better at and going from there. And then you've got your younger kids too, who are going to have, that list is going to be a little bit bigger or longer, however you want to say that. We really try to do our best to keep the gym balanced competitively. So there's not a lot, and I say that because that's how it's been the past 2 or 3 years is, in volleyball, you can definitely, have your starting side versus the other side. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that as far as continuity, and working with each other. But I always talk about the quality of the gym has to be high, the quality of the whole gym. So what I often do is I'll put, my 0-1, my starting outside hitter, but put them across the net from like my starting right side hitter. So now they're facing each other and having to hit and block against each other. And you do that so the level of the gym is high. So your number one outside, it's hard for them to score. You want that, right? Because that's what we're going to see. And I think that's when we do that, I think there's a lot of benefit that comes out of that. But I think one of the things that what you're risking is that continuity and having that group be together for that long. And last year we almost always went from, 2 different offensive systems within a set, within a match. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to get continuity. I often say, like, I think some of the best teams that I've ever coached have been club teams with about 10 kids on it, maybe 9 kids. Right? Everyone's got a very clearly defined role. And those teams get better, in my opinion, those teams get better faster. Now, in volleyball, especially Division I, you have to have depth in every position. And when we're all young, which we are, you're going to have a lot of rotating pieces and moving pieces. So even in those 28 matches or 29 matches that we have in the season, I think this year in particular, you're going to see a lot of different lineups. You're going to see a lot of different people. So if I'm not doing that in the practice gym where we're going against each other and putting, instead of having an A and a B side, then we're doing our own kids a disservice in preparing them for the match.
Yeah, that makes sense, Coach. What's a drill or team period that you wish you did, sooner in your career that's kind of reaped some benefits for you?
What's a drill now that we do?
Yeah, or team period or crossover.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I've been finding most beneficial in recent years, especially, is any kind of competitive 6-on-6 drill with certain constraints. Yeah. So that's what we kind of manipulate a lot, is what are the constraints to this drill. So for example, a constraint might be you can't set your left pin in the first 3 rallies or in the first 5 points, or you must set your middle at least once every 3 times, otherwise you go back down to 3 or to 0, whatever. I think those constraints to me are really nuanced, and they can be very specific to what your team needs. And then when I talk about those practices on Monday and Tuesday, when you're like, what are we bad at? Yeah. That's what I would build those constraints around that. So we're still playing 6s. It's, nothing unusual there, but there's going to be certain areas that you can't score with or that you must score with. And I think that's how you get them to buy into that change, and you're still keeping score, rather than, hey, we're not good at this skill, I'm going to rep you to death, or here's a coach serving at you, right? Those are things that I'm using now that I used to in the past, especially as a head coach here in the early years. I would take that ball. Hey, come in early to practice. I'm going to give you 100 reps. And we can still do that. And there's a place for that still. But I think it has to be much less than what I did in the past. And I also think that, again, this current way of doing it with just purely still under the spirit of competitiveness, still in a team system. So it's very authentic, because drilling, let's face it, when you drill somebody, it's not authentic. And yet you're addressing the areas of the game that we're weak at. And I love that part of it. I love that we can tackle that and still compete.
That's good stuff, Coach. That's really good stuff. If you were clinic talking, if you were going to a clinic and you had to speak on a technical drill, what would it be and why?
I would say that it would be a drill that I would say that is under kind of the guise of differential learning. So a technical drill that, when I say differential learning, I mean, adding some noise into the skill development, or instead of, I'll give you an example of a non-differential learning. Put a bucket out there and take a ball and then pass it into the bucket, right? You didn't get 3, or out of 5 tries, you got 2. You need, out of 5 tries, you got to get at least 3 out of 5 to move on. That is, I think to me, you're just killing the person. You're just killing the passenger of the game. You're erasing it, right? So the example of, I think, of what we're using a little bit more on in the differential side is, pass this ball higher than you think it should be. Pass this ball faster and lower than you think it should be. Pass it more to the left. Pass it more to the right. Pass it beeline right to the setter's head. And just getting that notion of like, this is what my body feels like to get it to do this. This is what it feels like to do that. And not so much that this is the one solution. It has to be here. Because the one thing we do say a lot in this program is no such thing as perfection. I remind my coaches, and when someone says perfect, like, don't say that word. It doesn't exist. And I think that's really important for my players to understand too, is that, we talk about, developing solutions to things. And for you as a passer might be different than for me, right? And I think, but I still want both of us to try to find better solutions for a short serve or a spinner that's cutting between us. And I think that those are things that are really, really important. So the other example that I would say it's often used in coaching is like the Goldilocks: too hot, too cold, just right. Right. I think that's so when we talk about technical development, that's what we're going to do here.
That's good stuff. So I'm glad you broke that down for me, because you said differential and then non-differential, and they just went, both of those just went right over my head, dude. Both of those went right over my head. But that's good though. Like, cause I've heard what you're explaining. I've heard it just kind of called as just contrast training, where you're just doing the extreme. Like you said, hey, you're going to set this ball as high as you can, and then you're going to set it, quick as you can. And then just, what does that feel like in your hands? And then finding that happy medium of, what it should ideally feel like, not be perfect, but what is the ideal touch look like?
Absolutely.
That's good stuff right there, Coach. I like that. Where did from a resource standpoint, like, where is Coach Seemann going to get new volleyball knowledge? Books you're reading, coaches that you're tapping into, what does that look like? If you could share some, that'd be awesome.
Certainly books that I think that I plenty of books that aren't necessarily always directly related to volleyball. One of my favorite books is Lombardi, which I don't use almost any of it, but there's your Packer reference. But
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff in there that is actually applicable, and there's a ton of it that isn't. There's a lot of some motor learnings things that I can send it in the chat or something like that. I can look that up, make sure I have everything right. I don't want to say the wrong author or wrong thing, but there's a lot of kind of like more of the science behind it. But I'll be honest with you, the most influence I get is actually like other teams. Literally other teams, whether they're warming up, whether they're playing, and I'm noticing like that's a very distinctive thing that program does, and I wonder if that works for us or if it would work for me. So I do watch a lot of other coaches, obviously, even from club levels all the way up to Division I, and most of the time they're coming from coaches that I'm playing against. It's not like I'm watching Stanford all the time or Texas. And then there's a lot of really good bloggers out there. There's a Coach Your Brains Out. That's very much like
is that specific to volleyball, or is that just coaching
volleyball? Yep. And they talk a lot about the differential learning. They talk a lot about, just the current state of the game, what works, what doesn't. They have some really good kind of like debates on there, which is really good. It's a podcast that you just hear. And, for example, I think one of the later ones was like, is the NCAA and volleyball in a better place now than it was 5 years ago? And one guy says yes, one guy says no. And then you battle it out. Really good stuff. And then there's like kind of like a lot of the I would call them gurus. Like they spent time with the national team. Joe Trinzi comes to mind. He's got a lot of a lot of information. And since he spent a lot of time kind of evaluating one piece of the game, there's a lot of knowledge that comes out of that I would never have personally gathered. So there's a lot of that. And nowadays with certainly with AI and the software that we use, it'll be much easier to consolidate those stats and to come up with some things. But lots of interesting things that are nuanced to most people, but for me, they really are important. Of all Division I teams, what is the area that that you pass the lowest score from? Where is that? From what serve? From where to where? Things of that nature. And I really like that information. And I think that information, while it might not translate directly to our players, it certainly shapes how I plan practice and how I go about teaching the game. And then, I also think that from just a mental standpoint, getting away from coaching books and kind of reading other things that kind of allow me to maybe be more empathetic and also to be more understanding, to be more aware of how other athletes are coming and how to meet them, at where they're at, things like that. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of influences, and I would say most of them are outside of the true volleyball coaching realm, as far as that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff, Coach. Talk to me just a little bit about, in your opinion, because I don't watch a lot of indoor beach volleyball, and this is the first time in 7 years that I've actually watched a lot of beach volleyball. Actually, really the first time ever that I, turn on AVP and watch AVP. But can you kind of talk about maybe a little bit how the game has evolved over the years? And, if you had to predict in 10 years what it might look like, what would that forecast look like? Because, just for me, just from being away from Seaside for 7 years, jump setting on the beach,
yeah.
And then jump sets over. Like, that's a big deal now. I was like, what is this, guys? What is this? That's a freaking double when it's coming over the net now. That's a double. But how has the game evolved? Where do you think it's going to be in 10 years from maybe just a skill application standpoint or a different approach to it? I don't know. What would that look like in the indoor?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the game has evolved, and I think the pieces that are the most obvious to me are first of all, just the pure awareness of the game, the sport. It's been televised more now than ever in the last 2 or 3 years, which is great. I've always said this to other coaches who are kind of growing up in the game with volleyball, and younger coaches as well, I played basketball in high school. I can watch basketball, I can watch college and pro basketball, and I can learn some things from that. And I can almost turn on the TV anywhere and it'll be on some version of it, right? You cannot turn on the television and see volleyball. At least for the longest time, you could never see it. So even if you knew nothing about the game, if I know nothing about football, if I watch enough, I can pick up enough stuff to at least learn, right? Whereas in volleyball, that wasn't available. So whatever knowledge that was there in volleyball, you had to go find it, and you had to go ask somebody, or you had to go live into a gym, you had to go in there. There wasn't a lot of resources for you to learn how to coach and to learn the game of volleyball. And so I think for that matter, in recent history, that has changed tremendously. So I do think that there's a lot more resources out there. It's much more accessible. It doesn't require necessarily a lot of money or have to go directly to a gym live to go see that. So I think that component, I think that we're going to see better coaching in the future already is.
Just accessibility.
Accessibility to knowledge and to information. Yeah, for sure. I also think that there's more participants playing, that's just the bottom line is we've got way more participants playing, and you can see often the controversy is how good has the coaching been for US national teams? Everybody's a lot of coaches in the US are looking at European models of coaching and being they're doing it better. They do it better. Yet we're winning the Olympics. So a lot of that is because of population, and that continues to grow. So the more people I think we have playing, I think the talent pool grows, the more physical athletes are going to get. And so I think for that reason too, the sport has just rocketed. And so now we're getting, I think a lot of those players who maybe have played women's basketball in the past are now playing women's volleyball. Maybe not as black and white as that, but you understand what I'm kind of saying. There's more participation, which is great. Yeah. And I think more often now too, like I said, you can turn the TV on and see a game. Where the sport is going, I'm not sure how much different it's going to necessarily look. You talk about you talked about the quality of the set, you have doubles coming over onto that you should have been a double. And a lot of, you can go 50-50 on everybody. The purists are going to say, you should be able to set a ball without that, and others aren't. I'm not sure if there's anything necessarily skill-wise or technically that's going to change much, except for that the game is going to continue to get more powerful. I've got some pretty innovative ideas that actually would be pretty cool, I think.
If you don't mind sharing it, unless you're kind of keeping it close to the chest. I've got two
that I think that are kind of interesting. I think that it's worth exploring whether or not you can block the serve.
Yeah.
because
That is interesting. Yeah.
I think that would set up some formations. It's almost like when you build, if you watch the World Cup much, I'm not sure, but like when you build a wall.
Up until the U.S. got knocked out, I was watching it. Yeah.
But like when there's a free kick, they build a wall and then, they kind of open up some areas or all this stuff. So to me, like blocking the serve, at least, especially probably for the men's game, would kind of put a little bit more thought into that serving and where they're serving and all that stuff. And then the other thing that we do in our gym right now, and you can mark my words because I'm the first to say this, is we have 2 contacts after you serve into the net. So if I serve into the net, front row blockers who are standing there getting ready to block can pop it up and send it over and the rally continues. Because right now, I think there's no greater disappointment in the game is when there's just a missed serve. It's just like you serve, it's just sometimes like the air just leaves the gym. And what if you still had 2 contacts after that?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What was the rationale behind doing the 2 contacts? Just from a practice flow standpoint, so you didn't waste time between the serves? Or
you get 3. You get 3 when you receive.
Yeah. You're right.
So
correct.
Why not keep it 3 when you serve? Like, yes, I know you could serve into your court. Like the caveat to that is has to hit the net for it to qualify that to have 2 more contacts. But I think that would be brilliant. And we do it now. So now our kids, they're all locked in. So, and I still have a candy bar in the deal. So I'm like giving candy bars out every other practice, but they're, the serving to the tape, the middle blocker will kick it up with their foot and then the third person will pop it over. And in our gym, that's legal. We play it. So the play continues. It's not a missed serve.
Has it ever come up in a game where just by habit, they do it?
Yes. And we lose the point and they all look over and smile and, and clap and everything. And the whole bench is going crazy and people are like, what's going on? They just lost that point, but we're still celebrating because, we converted this.
That's good. I like that.
But it keeps the rally going.
I think that would be a harder adaptation than the block and the serve.
Yeah. Yes, it would.
Because that makes sense to me. Like what constitutes a block? Like if someone passes it from 3 feet off the net on a short lob serve and passes it 3 feet from the net, but takes it with their hands up high.
Right.
What's the difference between that and, 2 more feet closer to the net and directing the ball?
Sure. Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of good that can come from it. I mean, like I said, you could hide passers behind your block. You could bait somebody into trying to serve in the open space and move it. I don't know. There could be a lot
That's an interesting. I like that one. What do the OGs say? Have you ran that idea behind any of the old timers? What do they say?
No, they just tell me crazy, I don't think anybody wants it. I don't know. I think in the men's game in particular, it makes more sense to block the serve. I think with those serves coming over like that.
Yeah, I mean, they're just freaking, they're ripping them.
They're cooking it, and I think everyone's complaint to the men's game is it's terminal, right? There's.
What do you mean by a terminal?
Terminal, it just means that it's usually an ace or it's an error and then if the pass does happen, that first swing is killed. There's not a lot of rallies, and women's volleyball tends to have more rallies, especially at the mid-major level. I think it does get, at the higher level, you do expect more first ball side outs. But I don't know. That's where I think that it could be a much more exciting game if more often than not, instead of that missed serve just ending with that, is there's a chance for an extended rally.
I like that. That's good stuff, man. That's really good stuff. You mentioned because of the population, talent pool, you think the game's going to obviously be more of a power game within 10 years. Just recruiting in general, what are some of the metrics? Mm-hmm. What are some of the abilities? What are some of the skill sets? What are some of the character traits that you're looking for within a player?
Yeah, I think that, I would probably say it's a gross generalization of my career here, but we've always been a little bit on the smaller side and still have had a lot of success as a result of that. Now, being a little bit smaller but still having a good jump is probably the next, prerequisite on that, especially as a net player. I think as a mid-major, we are not necessarily always, most of the time, as a matter of fact, we're not necessarily the top of that top tier kid is usually gone, right? So we're kind of left with, the second tier, what I would call. And so typically we've been getting a lot of 5'11", 6 foot speed kind of gazelles, I would call them. They're just good jumpers. They're quick. They have good, they've got live arms. Those things are really important. One thing that I challenge all of us and my staff in particular is we shouldn't be taking too many net players who aren't pretty close to already terminal blockers. In other words, when balls hit their hands, more often than not, it's being blocked, terminated, as a result of the block. That is one of the hardest skills to teach. And so that's one of the skills I'd like to see already kind of somewhat implemented, already kind of possess a lot of those recruits. Arm swing, yes, we can kind of, we all pretend as coaches we can fix a lot of those things. I think it's very difficult. because most of the time you're still battling with their 10,000 hours already. So whatever habits they have, a lot of them are going to be there for a while. And especially these kids who are playing club, practicing 3 days a week, going to private lessons for a 4th day a week, you're not going to undo that 10,000 anytime soon in college. We have less time actually with them for a lot of them. So I think they have to possess some sort of arm swing already. I tend to lean towards the type of athlete that is more of a steady Betty than somebody who is going to have a lot of highs or kind of more of a showy kind of like emit a lot of emotion. Not that I want like, robots or sleepwalkers, but I think that it's important to have someone who is consistently there and present mentally. And I think it's a hard thing to do, but also it's also a hard thing to identify just from watching from the outside. Even with conversations as they get farther along in the recruiting process, it's really hard to truly get a good sense of who they are. You learn a lot from their parents, you learn a lot from their club coaches. You got to put all that stuff together. And then you kind of have a picture of what that student athlete might be like in your program. So still then you don't really know until they're standing in front of you in your gym. So that's pretty interesting. And also sometimes nerve-wracking, right? I think that it's really important. It is an important skill. I think a lot of people talk about it being crazy important, but already, a really good server, or at least a creative server, someone who can really control the serve, put it where they want it. Someone who values holding onto that serve, I think is really important. And I think the last thing is maybe overgeneralization, but they're as good as they are in the air as they are in the ground. So, they're
say that one more time. Say that bar one more time for me.
They are in the air as they are on the ground.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So they're able to play, in the air well as far as decision making, how they use their body in the air as attackers, as blockers. And I think those are things we look for as well. So
that's most
of the time we find that, in 2 or 3 athletes. And for us, we're always, as we should be, I think, is kind of shooting a little bit above us as far as like what we're going after. And when we get, when and if we get those no's, then you're getting that next level player who doesn't have all those attributes, but maybe they have 2 of the 3 of those attributes, which is we'll take,
Yeah, no doubt. That's good stuff, Coach. Gave you a heads up beforehand. Another question of the day. She didn't come with some creativity today, but that's all right. Her question was, what's your favorite color?
Favorite color has to be green. It has to be green.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit. I looked at your roster. I think it was last night. Would you have 2, 3 international players on your team?
We'll have 3.
Like that?
We'll have 3 this year. Yeah, just all recently acquired.
Yeah. Talk to me. 1, going outside the country to acquire talent. 2, I guess, bringing them in, the team culture, getting them bought in. Because 1, there's a language barrier, and 2, you're still trying to, get them acclimated to the team and get the team acclimated to them.
Right. Yeah. If you certainly in the past we've had a lot of kids from. I'm almost always had somebody international roster from somewhere. We've had Serbians, we've had Slovakians, Canadians. And so, I think generally speaking, once you start kind of dipping in those markets and getting in there and recruiting in there, you tend to, get more than one as years go on. I think in the last about maybe about 8 years ago or something like that, I kind of was just moving away from it a little bit just because of efficiency, for budget reasons, like for recruiting, like where does our money matter most? What is the most efficient way to evaluate and then attract student athletes to get here? And I think that, adding a Europe trip every other year was risky. And sometimes, I think when it didn't pay off, it kind of, it nudged me to not do it as much. And then I think as we move into the last 5 years with NIL being a big thing and the transfer portal, and, I think a lot of people joke now, and it's not necessarily a joke, but, a lot of people are kind of making that claim that, mid-majors are now the new community colleges for the top tier programs. So if you've got a really good kid in the Big Sky Conference, it doesn't take much for someone in this, SEC to look at, okay, who got player of the year? Oh yeah. And we can give her, this revenue sharing and all that stuff. There's a lot of factors now where you're kind of like, a lot of coaches say you have to re-recruit your kids every year, So I think that is a factor to consider. And so not that as a result of that, but I figured that I think going outside of the country and kind of getting away from that fray. Now it's possible that if we pull in somebody who is great and who shines and who has a great freshman year, that we're going to lose her, but I can't think that way. I have to think, essentially a year at a time. Also, I would say now Europe is almost over recruited. So there's a lot more services that take you there that'll take you around the gyms. When I first started recruiting there, I had a friend who was just, gracious enough to take me around gyms there. He coached there. And so he was able to take me around there. And that's how I got into into the network there. But as you know, it's the same thing. I mean, flip the roles for a second. If someone came and watched my team and they were like, hey, I'm a head coach in Australia and we're building this league and I really want your kids, I'd be like, you'd be defensive, right? I mean, you necessarily want them to leave your program, especially since, most of those countries are developing their youth national teams, and a lot of those kids are on those teams. They don't want to see them go. So there's a lot of that too. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. On the other side of it, on the chemistry side of it, I absolutely loved the kids that we've had from other countries. Have been unbelievably awesome and also really appreciative of the opportunity, which I would say you don't always get with American kids, because they know that almost any other place in the world, this is one of the few places in the world where you can go to school and play ball.
Yeah.
All those players in Europe.
People don't realize that, man.
Yep.
I did a season out there for football. Everything is club sports. Sports are not attached to school at all.
Yep. And you must choose. You must do one or the other. And so that's why it's it's an incredible opportunity for them. And especially if they're on scholarship and they're getting that school paid for, that's a rare opportunity, even though a lot of colleges are free in Europe. But I think it's an opportunity that, that obviously I think that they're very appreciative of. And I think that does shape a little bit of how they are within the program. Also, I think there's definitely some benefit culturally just to have someone from a completely different culture. And even though it's still, it's European culture for the most part, which isn't that much different, but I just love that you have newfound curiosity for each other and again build bonds that are much greater than just, oh, you're from Nevada, California, all the areas in the region. So I think there's mostly benefits from it.
Yeah. For your program specifically, transfer portal, net positive, net negative, depending on the year.
Net positive. Yeah, I mean, net positive. It's interesting. I don't think, maybe I can count maybe one or two athletes that I was both shocked and disappointed that they left, and then there's the rest who have left the program for reasons that I think were right. And then I think we've had 3 years in a row the newcomer of the year, which is a transfer specific award for the Big Sky Conference. So we're definitely benefiting in that regard as far as who's coming in, and we're getting a lot out of those people. So in that respect, I'd say it has to be net positive.
Yeah. Kind of just diving in the recruiting side a little bit more, just because I'm kind of naive to it from a volleyball standpoint. Obviously going across the pond a little bit, but within the States, what's your guys' recruiting footprint? And then usually every year, like kind of what's the number that you are allotted to bring in? Or I guess on average, are you bringing in 3-4 girls every year? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a transfer portal, which is different. I'm assuming you're talking like this is from high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to average out. Like we have 6 incoming this year, so it's a big class.
That is big. Right.
But I would say average is 2 to 3. You're usually looking to fill almost one of every position every year. And if we're taking the portal out of the question, I think that, there's a lot of success coming out of California's, Arizona, Colorado, Western Hemisphere kind of schools that are states that are typically in the South that have, a very different climate. It's funny because it's probably it's both funny and kind of tragic. The most talked about thing, I think, when it comes to recruiting, and often the thing that comes up first is like, oh, it's so green here. I love it here. Like, it's just like, but are you choosing a school because of the weather? Really? We'd like to think so. I mean, not, think so, but we'll take it. You know what I'm saying? I'll be like, sure. Yeah, it's great here, But it's so funny because that is the number one factor for a lot of people, which I think it's a very strange thing. But that's probably the most common, because I think the thing you hear the most is, we want to be away from home, but not too far. We want to be within a 2-hour flight. And so you get a lot of regional players, a lot of kids from California want to come here. And like I said, Arizona, a lot of success from Vegas. We've had quite a few kids from Nevada. So I think a lot of people kind of trying to escape the brownness of the Southwest, and the kind of like compared to when you get here, it's just like a completely different story. So that's probably where you had the most success. And along with that, obviously the conference itself lends itself to playing there. So I think a lot of people who are within reach of the conference too, they at least get to see their kid at least once a year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's where we have the most success.
Yeah. How do you go about establishing a sense of shared leadership, within the team? And, if you guys got a captain process, what does that look like?
First of all, I really like this as a stolen term for sure, but it's a leader in every locker. It's something that we talk about a lot. What that looks like is obviously going to be very different for everybody. But I do think that, I tend to shy away from having a lot of designated captains or designated leaders. And the reason why I say that is because I found that it's an inefficient way to run a program. And I think there's also those captains, whether intentional or not, end up being gatekeepers to information. So, first of all, whether that message gets to me, from the ground, from the player to the captain to me, whether it even gets there, or whether it gets there, but the message is different, kind of like the phone game. And then also for me to respond to a leader or a captain and then have it get back is just an inefficient way to communicate, I think. And so I shy away from having designated. Now there's people who tend to be like, this is what color we're wearing. This is the uniform we're wearing. That stuff that's happened organically. I don't mind that. I'm never going to squash that, but I definitely stay away from being like, this is our captain. This is all the information must go through her, and then it comes to me. I think it's inefficient. And then what are we saying about the rest of the team, right? As far as their voices. So the other thing that we say is all voices are equal, all voices are heard. And so I want that freshman who's coming in day one, believing that she has every right to speak up. This is as much as her program as it is of the senior or the captain who has been here, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, really important, is that all voices are heard, all voices are equal. And and then along with that comes the expectation that I do hear your voice. Because otherwise I think, that's my captain, that's my leader. I can just quietly sit back here, and I think we're doing that person a disservice. You're doing your team a disservice, and potentially asking for problems in terms of communication.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Coach. When you're talking about just the weekly breakdown earlier, just as far as you guys' practice schedule, I guess from a scouting perspective, what information are you giving your players on the opponent? What's that pertinent information look like?
I think it varies from year to year. We've got 6 incoming freshmen last year. We got 6 incoming this year. So we're a very young team. And, I think if I poured everything into what I would want them to know, it would probably tie their hands and maybe be a little suffocating for them. So I'm very particular about how much information that we share with the team. I think that it's really important, I think, to identify 1 or 2 things that I think that are nuanced about that team. I tend to sometimes lose faith in scouting altogether because the lessons are the same. They're very similar. Our systems are very similar, whether, as far as volleyball goes, there's going to be a middle attacker. There's going to be, a set to the pin, and some of those sets are going to be faster. Sometimes middles are going to run a 1.5 tempo. Those are things I think to really point out. But if I had to lean one way or the other, I'd be more of like the John Wooden fan of just like, we block line and we block line against everybody. That's the bottom line. We always do. That's what we do. And it doesn't matter who we're playing against. In a perfect world, I think that would be great because I'd be able to do that. But we know that there's enough information out there, and I think enough nuances with the opponents that we should be identifying them. So the long answer to your question is typically we identify 1, 2, maybe 3 things that are particular to that team that I think are distinctly different than us or distinctly different than other teams we played. Although that's going to, repeat itself sometimes. I think that's really the most important thing when it comes to scouting.
Yeah. When you were talking about, just the resources as far as acquiring knowledge, and you mentioned other coaches and, opponents within your conference, can you kind of just break down, what are, some of those things that you are looking at as far as, some of those things that you are looking at?
Yeah, I think certainly, what's popping up as a weak passer and where. I think that's something that we do a really good job of is when we train serving in our own gym, we don't talk about areas as much as we talk about positions of the body, like let's aim for over the right shoulder of this passer. I think certainly even watching warm-ups, I can identify a passer that has an efficient movement that I feel like we can pick on. But on film too, you can see that as well. That's certainly something just that is more of our in control than anything else, is where we're serving and against whom, which is a big piece. I think certainly, tempo. So teams that are really good ball handling, teams that have a faster tempo to the pin, that's going to cause us to probably to adjust our blocking base where we start. We might put our middles a step closer to that left pin. We might step off center left because they run a fast back set. And those are things that I think we do. We talk about maybe isolating one hitter with 2 blockers, making sure there's 4 hands in front of her, and leave this hitter alone with 1 blocker. What does that look like behind? And I always hope that these lessons are already learned because we've done it before. I always say that too. Like we talk about scouting reports, that knowledge should start to be accumulated where it's not like something new again. Like, oh, this is another team. It's a different team, but we did this against fill in the blank. And I remember, coach wanted me to take angle here. Is that what we're doing? Yeah, you got it, right? So you want that information to kind of carry over to the point where I think you actually have, less information in these scouting reports in the future as you build more experienced teams. So
I like that, Coach.
I think this would be the year to probably keep it simple, but also do a little bit more explaining, because you've got 12 of your players have only been here a year, or this is their first year. So there's going to be a lot of information that could easily overwhelm them.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you could sit down with any coach, can be in the realm of volleyball or any other sport, who would that coach be? What would be that one question that you need to ask that coach?
Yeah, this is one I never thought of. It doesn't have to be a volleyball coach, huh?
You mentioned Lombardi, you mentioned Wooden, you mentioned some greats.
Yeah, I think maybe and I don't know a lot. It's like I don't know a lot about. I couldn't even say a lot about what I have heard from. Is it Pop, who the old Spurs coach?
Yeah, Coach Popovich.
Yeah, he seems to be both innovative and also, I think from what I understand is from outside looking in, is someone who also treats his players very well. And I think people, other coaches are also fond of him, right, and respect him quite a bit. And then maybe I'm wrong. I could be totally wrong.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean,
okay.
that's a great answer right there.
Yeah, and I just think that and I hate to equate it to a man's sport, but it's like, yeah, I think that in it's somebody who I feel like has been innovative, has creative, and again, I think someone who cares about the human being part as much as the player.
Yeah. What would the one question be?
How do you do it?
Touche.
I mean, I do think the one question would probably go back to what I said is, how do you deliver difficult news or difficult conversations? How do you deliver it in a way that can be heard? And not taken as an insult, or not taken as a deterrent to their development.
Yeah, I like that, Coach. Any final advice on coaching, teaching, leadership for the good of the community?
Never stop learning. Yeah, I'd say never stop learning, and watch other teams. I've learned more about the game just watching other teams, scouting, watching film. There's no limit to how much film you can watch, and as far as like learning more about the game. And the other thing I'd say specifically to a volleyball coach is try to train yourself to watch film without watching the ball.
Ooh, that's a good note.
Take your eyes off the ball and get it on the other side before the ball comes across. And that's something that I think is really.
Are you talking about from a scout, just a purely scouting perspective, or just in general?
Or developing your team. Like, I think that the coaches that I respect the most are the ones who have staffs where you walk in and there's one guy just watching the middle blocker's feet, because that day was like, that was the day they're going to work on first step quickness and read and respond. And that feedback just goes to that middle the entire time, whether not necessarily a high frequency, but we all want to see the kill, or we all take our eyes off of that and kind of like appreciate the action. But very rarely are we looking at what's happening off the ball. And that's exactly what you want your players to be able to do, is to get your eyes off the ball and onto what's next sooner. But as a coach, both scouting and also I think watching your own team and evaluating your own team, taking your eyes off of what is my middle blocker doing when the ball's on the other side of the net, especially mid-rally when you don't have that time to organize. Because there is a big difference. Like when you're serving, you've got time for all the plans in the world, right? Before the serve, you can say, this is what I'm doing. I'm standing here. These are my options. But when rallies continue, that's when we lose a lot of that discipline as far as starting points and first step quickness and all that stuff.
That's a good answer. I like that. Well, shoot, Coach. Hey, appreciate your time, man. I'll have this edited and turned around and released on Friday.
Awesome.
And I'll shoot you a text on the side, probably get a picture from you that you want to use for the episode cover. And then, go from there. Well, I appreciate you.
Sounds great. I appreciate the opportunity. This is fun.
All right, Coach. Thank you, man. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.